If you're ready for the Super Bowl, this is the game. This is the video for you. We're going to go through so much, whether it's DFS Showdown, whether it's you're looking for the key stats and matchups that are going to help you choose the right bets this weekend. We're going to get into it all, go player by player, position by position, talk it all through, and give you the keys to success for this weekend. So, yes, it is the Kansas City Chiefs versus the San Francisco 49ers, 47.5 over under. The Niners favored by 2 points. We're going to get straight into it. If you do have questions, drop them in the chat as we go. I will try and get to all of them tonight. San Francisco favored by 2, and you can understand why. They've been the most consistent team out of the two teams here. I think if the Ravens had been in this Super Bowl final, then it would have been very different, sort of like there would have been a lot of different layers to it. But the Ravens shit the bed, so they're not here. In terms of how we're going to go, we're going to start with the quarterback, and we'll start with the Niners. Brock Purdy at 10K. He's the fourth highest priced player on the slate. He's only $600 cheaper than Patrick Mahomes, and I think a lot of the money and a lot of the people are going to try and go towards Patrick Mahomes for $600 more instead. The Niners, they've scored 58 points in the last 2 playoff games. Purdy's not been over 19 points in either of those games. So even though I'm in the camp of I like Brock Purdy, I think Brock Purdy is getting a very raw deal from some people. When he has faced some of these top passing defenses, he hasn't performed to the highest standards. You know, he scored 6.4 points against the Ravens, 7.7 against the Browns. The Chiefs, they are a good pass defense. You know, this is a top 5 unit. So I think if you are going to play Brock Purdy, you want to be double stacking him at a minimum here. You want to be looking at going, okay, well, in order for Brock Purdy to pay off, he's going to probably have to score 3 passing touchdowns or score 300 passing yards. And if that happens, then he is going to have multiple options who are fantasy viable. Christian McCaffrey is clearly going to be the most popular captain choice. I think it's quite obvious why as well. You know, the Niners, they have to come out and run the ball against the Chiefs. The Ravens just did not hold their nerve there, and they didn't stay true to what's made them a good team this year. So the avenue to success for the Niners is to run the ball on this Chiefs defense that ranks 27th against the run. I think it's definitely possible they can just come out and give CMC sort of 15 to 20 touches and be quite aggressive with it. CMC, he's scored over 28 points in 4 of the last 5 games. He's played 2 rushing touchdowns in each of the playoff games he's played in this year. If you're fading him, you need to come up with a strong narrative for why you don't want CMC in your lineup, and you need to really move away from that. We'll get into that kind of stuff a little bit later on. Elijah Mitchell at 2,800 is probably one of the biggest leverage plays on the slate. You know, you can tell yourself a story where CMC gets injured early and Elijah Mitchell just sees a ton of touches. Or say CMC gets injured and misses a few plays like he did last week. Elijah Mitchell came in and had 4 carries for 7 yards and a touchdown. Of course, it didn't really matter because CMC still scored 2 touchdowns and had a great day. But if CMC missed, half an hour of game action or something like that, and Elijah Mitchell scored points, even if CMC puts up a decent amount of points, you're still taking away from what CMC's ceiling was. And that can play into him just not quite getting there enough for the lineups to matter. So I think if you're playing max enter sort of 20 lineups, or if you're playing 150 lineups, I wouldn't be against playing Mitchell in a lineup with CMC. I think that's perfectly viable if the Niners come out and really go run heavy. And then, I wouldn't be afraid of just fading CMC and putting Elijah Mitchell into a lineup. But when CMC's been healthy, it really just has been the CMC show this year. Moving over to wide receivers. The Niners' true wide receiver 1, my guy Deebo Samuel, most expensive wide receiver on the slate. And this game just really sets up perfectly for him. I'm going to be very aggressive on Deebo this week. I'll have some lineups that are really starting with him at the captain spot. He's at a 27% target share versus 2 high safety looks, and nobody runs more 2 high safety looks across the league than the Chiefs do. Deebo also tends to crush against zone, which some of the Chiefs use quite a bit of at time. Meanwhile, the one exception is they play L'Jarius Sneed as sort of shadow coverage, man coverage, and he tends to go with outside wide receivers quite often. That seems to be Brandon Aiyuk. Like, it all adds up to Brandon Aiyuk having a quieter day, and then Deebo Samuel having a bigger day. Uh, Deebo last week caught 8 of 9 targets for 89 yards. It seemed like he still wasn't fully healthy. 2 weeks off, should be completely fine in this game. I'm expecting a big part of the game plan. Aiyuk, I mentioned like the 2 high safety looks that Deebo sees so many targets against. Aiyuk gets a 17% target share. He's only just ahead of George Kittle in that look. And Aiyuk, he's not more than 3 receptions since week 17. He's a great player, incredibly talented, but the game plans seem to pass him by a little too much at times, and I'm happy fading him. In terms of depth options for the Niners, Jauan Jennings, I mean, he's just more of a run blocker than anything else. Yeah, he's 4K this weekend, which is really expensive for a player who's had 1 catch for 8 yards last week. And I don't mind taking shots on him because I think the price range that he's at, he's going to kind of get left behind people who play the kickers, people who play the defenses instead. But yeah, it's not a really appealing one. Then George Kittle, 6,400. He faces a Chiefs defense that allows 4th fewest fantasy points to the tight end position. They held Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews in check last week. They combined for 4 catches for 31 yards. Against the Bills before that, the Chiefs allowed 6 catches for 49 yards to Dawson Knox and Dalton Kincaid. So, that's kind of an okay amount for tight ends to put up, but you need those touchdowns as well. Kittle, he's by far the cheapest of the Niners' sort of elite pass catchers, but he's also the most volatile. You look at his last 5 games, he scored 4.7 points, 18.1 points, 5.9, 22.6, and 7.4. It's just a really difficult click for me. But at the same time, you always know with George Kittle, he could absolutely break the slate. We are closing in on 1,700 subscribers, 1,750. I need your help to get there. Just because the season's over, it doesn't mean fantasy football is. We've got rookie profiles, we've got mock drafts, so much of the content coming your way. So hit that subscribe button right this second. And we are going to go over to Kansas City. So Patrick Mahomes, 10,600. He's scored over 20 points just twice since week 8. He's thrown for multiple touchdowns only twice in the last 8 games. And all season, he's only hit the 300 passing yard bonus 4 times in 20 games. That 300 passing yard bonus is a huge deal for a player like Mahomes. We've seen it in previous seasons. He was almost automatic with it last year. And those 3 extra points just really separate from other players. But this year, he's just not getting there. It seems like the supporting cast just isn't there. And I'm not sure I'd bet on him to do that this week. I don't think I want to captain him. I think he's fine in the flex. Probably one of those players you want to try and get up to unless you're really counting in your lineup on the Chiefs running backs doing all the damage. Speaking of running backs, Pacheco, 20.2 rush attempts over the last 4 games. He's just getting all the volume. Jerick McKinnon is only $200, and if he plays, I think he's completely viable. But it seems very unlikely. Andy Reid said there was an outside chance he could possibly get there, but I'm really not sure he's going to do so. And then Pacheco, with Jerick McKinnon not on the field, Pacheco's been getting so much more usage in the passing game. He's caught all 13 of his targets over the last 4 games. The problem for Pacheco is, again, going back to the bonuses, he's only had 300-yard games all season. And what we want from a player at the running back position is to be able to hit that mark. The Niners, they rank 15th against the run in DVOA, so they are susceptible to it. It's just always been one of those cases of this quite often put teams out of their run-heavy approaches because they force them to pass, because they just put up points themselves. But I think the Chiefs can stay toe-to-toe here, and I think Pacheco is definitely a healthy captain choice and definitely a very viable flex choice. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I've got to mention him. He's only 1,200. This is probably his last game as a Chief. I think, you're talking about a pending free agent. There's no reason for them to bring him back. He's not scored more than 5 points since week 16. Last week against the Ravens, he had 1 rushing yard, 3 receiving yards on 3 touches. There's just nothing there, really. Moving over to pass catchers on the Chiefs. Rashee Rice, he could have had a big day against the Ravens. He had that touchdown called back, and it was a terrible holding call. Well, it was a terrible hold. It was a right call. But it meant Rice was kept below 13 points for the second time in 2 straight games, which has been disappointing considering that over the previous 7 games, he averaged 21 points. I do think he can get back into form here. The Niners, they allowed the 13th most fantasy points to wide receivers this year. They are strong against the pass, but they just do give up points. And Rice is absolutely the primary option for the Chiefs. Since week 12, he's led the team in target share with 27%. When you look at the other Chiefs wide receivers, I mean, it's not pretty, is it? You've got Marcus Valdes-Scantling, who's 3K. He hasn't broken double digits in the playoffs, despite seeing a little bit of a resurgence in form. The last time he had double-digit points was week 6. The team, they definitely seem to trust him. Mahomes threw that game-sealing ball to him against the Ravens. They've given him a couple of deep shots that he's actually caught in recent weeks. So I don't mind mixing him in, but you kind of know what you're getting. Justin Watson was 2,400, 3 catches for 36 yards on 5 targets in the playoffs. He scored over 5 points once since week 11. Sky Moore, 2K, might play in the game, but averages 3.8 points per game this year. Last scored a touchdown in week 2. 3 games all year where he's caught more than 2 passes. McCall Hardman, after the Buffalo debacle, he just got removed from the game plan against the Ravens. He had 0 touches last week, and then he gets to Kadarius Toney, a player who needs things to be scripted for him to succeed. And he's too busy going on Instagram Live. He's too busy causing a fuss. Yes, Kadarius Toney could score a touchdown or something and pay off handsomely at 1,400. But when I look at the fact that since week 5, he's not been over 25 yards in a single game, it's really tricky for me to click Kadarius Toney. And I think the only way I would was if I was playing 150 max lineup sort of tournament. Moving over to tight end, Travis Kelce, 10.2K, 3rd highest player on the slate. Really just found his form as soon as he got to the playoffs. He scored 70.7 DK points over the last 3 playoff games combined, been over 70 receiving yards in each of those games, averaging 9 targets per game in the playoffs. And the 49ers, they rank 4th against tight ends in DVOA. But they've allowed some really good games to good tight ends this year. Trey McBride in week 15, 102 yards. Sam Laporta, 97 yards in the conference game. TJ Hawkinson, week 7, 86 yards. Week 16, Isaiah Likely, 56 yards. Week 4, Zach Ertz, 53 yards. Week 11, Cade Otton, 49 yards. So they're not completely a lockdown defense against tight end position. Noah Gray at 1,800 is somebody who will pick up a little bit of ownership. He's run a route on 42% of dropbacks during the playoffs and a 10% target share. And I think he's an okay dart throw as a salary saver at that price. My favorite plays, for me, it's Deebo Samuel at captain. I think this is one which I'm going to be aggressive on. I will have plenty of lineups that feature Deebo as the captain. I think if I wasn't going with Deebo, I'd look at Travis Kelce as captain with Mahomes in the flex. And if you do that, you're likely going to have to come down to George Kittle to get exposure to the volume that we're hoping that the Niners will put up. Or I like CMC with Mahomes and Rice, playing into the idea that the Chiefs are trailing and they have to pass the ball heavily, and CMC is the optimal captain. I prefer the Chiefs defense to the Niners. You look at the Chiefs defense and they're 3,400, so they're cheaper. They scored 14 points against the Ravens. They goose-egged against the Bills, 8 against Miami, 15 against Chargers. In those 4 games, we've had 15 sacks, 2 interceptions, 3 fumble recoveries. Meanwhile, the Niners defense costs more and they are just not delivering on that price. So they're my favorite fades. I'm fading Brandon Aiyuk at captain. I just can't get there on this slate. I think everything sets up on paper to be a Deebo Samuel week. We saw the week when Deebo left against the Packers. Everybody came out afterwards and said Deebo was going to be a huge part of the game plan, and it really threw them that day. And I think 2 weeks of Kyle Shanahan cooking up plays for Deebo, that's where I land. I just don't think that it's going to be an Aiyuk game. And then Jake Moody. I was surprised to see Jake Moody's ownership being as high as it's being projected. He costs more than Harrison Butker. He's averaging, 80% completion rate on his field goals, well below the NFL average of 85%. He's not scored over 11 points since week 3. And part of that is because the Niners offense is efficient, so they just score touchdowns rather than field goals. But Moody's missed plenty of kicks too. I'd rather play Harrison Butker, who's, 2 games over 14 points in the last 5. So, yeah, Jake Moody definitely not making it near any of my lineups. And then if you're looking for 1 or 2 last start throws, I don't mind Kyle Juszczyk. He's had, I think it was 3 targets last week. He's very cheap. That's all you really need to pay off there. So that is the Super Bowl preview. If you have questions, leave them in the comments. I will always get back to every single question all the way up to the game. Appreciate you checking it out. If you haven't already, head over to our channel. Check out the Dynasty buys and sells that Rich put out this week. There's some great advice in those. We've got loads more content coming your way very soon.